Please welcome New York State Unified Court System Judge Joseph Zayas. Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Adam Silvera. Administrative Judge for Supreme Honorable Suzanne Adams. District Attorneys Marcia Perdue, Morgan Bitton, Susan Cacase, and Mary Pat Donnelly. B. Hansen, the Executive Director of the Office of Victim Services. And Council Member Keith Powers. Please welcome Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz. Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez. Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark. And Staten Island District Attorney Michael McMahon. And now, please stand and welcome the 57th Governor of the great state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. You know, 4 months ago, I vowed to end the insanity of letting dangerous offenders walk free on minor technicalities. I vowed to protect the rights of defendants, holding more criminals accountable. And I vowed to stand up for victims for too many years have felt their voices did not matter, and make sure they had the justice they deserve. And you all know this. I vowed I would not sign off on a state budget unless it included common sense discovery reforms. And guess what? We got it done. I want to first of all thank our host, the New York County Courthouse, and our home district attorney, Alvin Bragg. Thank you for all your advocacy, and all of our fellow DAs. If I had a better voice, this is only allergies. I'm not contagious. Everybody looks at me like, does she have something we got to watch out for? I'm fine. Just don't sound like it. So all of our DAs have been introduced, but my gosh, when they team up together for a cause, not just the boroughs, but also our statewide district attorneys who really banded together to fight for common sense changes. I want to thank them for everything they did. Kathy Hochul was a driving force on behalf of the New York City Partnership as well. Thank you. My staff worked relentlessly on this issue because they knew they were not going home until we got it done. I want to thank them for hanging in there. Karen Persicilli-Keogh, my Secretary of the Governor, and Brian Mahana, my counsel, who's fairly new on the job, and I hope he stays after all this, and my policy director, Jackie Bray, and the commissioners you heard spoken of as well. You know, this is just the power of an idea and what can happen when people mobilize to do the right thing. And that's exactly what happened here. And I'm talking about, like I said, the DAs and the advocates. I mean, I did so many roundtables with advocates, many times victims of domestic violence who felt like people just ignored them, that their voices didn't matter at all, that they just were meaningless. And after event after event after event, I knew we could not let them down. And to the brave survivors who came forward of all crimes, they spoke so eloquently about painful experiences because they wanted there to be a change for the people who come after them. And that is such an inspiration for me. So to all of them, this victory belongs to everyone in this room and everyone out there who fought so hard for this. Give yourselves a round of applause. I'll say it again. My number one priority as your governor is to keep everyone safe. We fixed the flawed bail laws. We drove down gun violence rates to near historic lows. We're focused on safety. We strengthened our red flag laws. No other state is doing what we're doing and stopping people from having access to guns who could do harm to others. We secured unprecedented dollars for our district attorneys and our defenders so they could do their jobs and fight domestic violence. We cracked down on retail theft. We also saw that our subways have become a frightening place. And with our dollars at the state level, made sure that there's at least 2 police officers on every single overnight train, and people are feeling better, and the rates of crime are going down. And I want to say none of this means anything, though, if we have the police officers who arrest an offender, bring them downtown, and people who do harm to others get cycled in and out over and over and over because of an inane loophole that allows that to happen. Now, back in 2019, our state legislature made some long overdue reforms. They were important, and I stand behind many of them because the system was skewed against the defendants. And I want to thank the legislature for what they did then. But in public life, we often have to be watching what is happening and look at the data. 5 years down the road, what has happened? I'll tell you what has happened. The pendulum went from one extreme to the other extreme, and we had to do something about it. Suddenly, rock-solid cases are being thrown out over minor prosecution omissions that had nothing to do with the merits of the case, not at all. Statewide dismissals jumped from 10,000 in 2019 to over 50,000 in 2024. That's an enormous number of people who never had their day in court, never had the sense of vindication or justice for victims. Because behind every one of these senseless dismissals is someone who put themselves out there, or a family that put themselves out there. In some cases, they put themselves in danger. You think of a young mother trapped in an abusive relationship. She finally has the courage to come forward and tell her story of what has happened to her in the sanctity of her home, a place that's supposed to be full of love. It takes a lot of courage. I know, because that's the kind of household my own mother was raised in, until her abusive father finally moved out and left her and her mom alone. And my mother channeled that experience, not to become jaded and turn against others, but to feel such enormous empathy for victims of domestic violence, something that I share with her. So when I think about these people who finally come forward at their own risk, or an innocent commuter whose life is cut short by a drunken driver, someone riding on a subway train who just wants to get to work safely, not be bothered, and someone viciously assaults them, or even a small business owner like my friend Deborah Koenigsberger, whose shop has been repeatedly ransacked by retail thieves. She works so hard. We did an event with her, and her store is magnificent. But she never knows when the little bell rings on the door. Someone walks in. Are they going to just steal what she worked so hard to put on her shelves? She's with here today. Deborah, can you stand up? Thank you. Thank you. These are the people we have been fighting for. And while I started this conversation way back in January, seemed like an eternity ago, my State of the State, each of you have carried the message forward, developing support for something where there had been none. You lobbied our legislators. You spoke with the journalists. You wrote columns. You told your stories. And you brought this story to the forefront and ultimately persuaded the legislators to rebalance the scales of justice. That's all we're looking for, rebalancing the scales of justice. And especially our DAs who stepped up and had to leave their jobs and be on late-night phone calls on Easter morning and on Passover and taking time from their families, working with particularly Carl Heastie, the speaker, who was persuaded that this is something that needed to happen. And I thank him and Leader Andre Stewart-Cousins for finally, after many, many weeks of hard-fought negotiations and conversations, helping us get to a place we finally can do justice for these people. So cases will no longer be thrown out over trivial errors that have no bearing on someone's guilt or innocence, like hitting the wrong button on a surveillance video or submitting a police personnel file just a day late. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, but that's the law was that they had to throw those out. We're leaving out a minor report that already has a duplication, has no bearing on the case at all. So for the first time, we'll be easing this enormous burden on our prosecutors by narrowing what they have to turn over. It's that simple. And we're ending the gotcha game where defense lawyers cannot wait to the last possible second and raise a perceived discovery omission, say, gotcha. Now it's going to be thrown out. They perfected this, many of them. And who's left behind? A victim without justice. So this means prosecutors can focus where it matters, focus on the real evidence, focus on accountability, and focus on justice for victims. Now, as I've said all along, I would hold up over a $250 billion budget on this issue. And here's why. Behind all the legal jargon that some may not quite comprehend, there's real people's lives at stake here. That's why I wouldn't leave. That's why I couldn't walk away from this fight. You can't have violent criminals or people who are offenders who hurt other human beings be able to walk free because of evidence that was irrelevant but may have been excluded. Now, we want them to have justice. We want there to be fairness in court. Of course there'll always be. That's why everyone who's an elected official takes an oath of office. I took the same oath of office. But we have to think about the consequences on real people for the first time in a long time. And I want to make sure that when we look on this together, look back at this arduous struggle, we'll say we fought, we won, and we got it done. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me turn it over to our president of the District Attorneys Association statewide, Richmond County District Attorney Michael McMahon.
Come on, we can do better than that. Governor Kathy Hochul of the great state of New York. May it please the court. Oops, wait a second. I'm not here for that today, but I do have to say respects to Judge Joseph Zayas, who's our chief administrative judge, Judge Adams, who's in charge of this courthouse. Thank you so much for allowing us here. At the end of the day, we DAs know we have to appear before the judges, so we better be respectful. But Governor, we join in everyone in this room to thank you for your incredible leadership and for really digging in your heels on an issue that is so important to so many New Yorkers, as we see here today, and as you've heard the voices, as we all have dug our heels in on this battle that was so important. And you mentioned, if I could be so bold as to just slightly correct, because you said in a way that this initiative started in January, but actually it was a year ago, April, that I had just become the president of the State DAs Association, that we were in your office in Midtown, the city DAs, and we were talking about your initiative to combat retail theft and what a problem that had become in the state. and Kathy Wild was there as well. And we talked about that and the initiative that we're taking and the laws that were changed, that we can aggregate cases now, we can protect retail workers. And we talked about the biggest problem we saw facing fairness and equity and public safety was the discovery laws. And as you said, passed with good intentions in 2019, but there have been some unintended consequences from them. And the way I described it then to Kathy and to yourself was that in many ways, our criminal justice process has become a game of chance. Our courthouses have become casinos where defense lawyers can hold their cards to the last minute, maybe roll their dice and get a case dismissed because of something that wasn't relevant, wasn't material, had no bearing on the case. And we had to then explain to victims of crime that their case was dismissed because of a game of chance, if you will. And we needed to end that. And, you know, it's not a game of chance that was just unfair to victims, but in many ways it's unfair to those who were charged with the crime as well, because someone would be charged with a robbery and be convicted because the evidence was collected and presented and the case proceeded, and someone else would commit the same crime, and because a piece of paper was left unsubmitted or unexchanged, because a police officer's notebook wasn't collected, because a body-worn camera wasn't collected and turned over, no bearing on the cases were getting dismissed. And so you said, we are not going to allow this game of chance, this unfairness, this gamesmanship to go on. And you said, let's get to work and do something about it. And I commend you for your commitment. I learned you through a process like this. I think we all learned, my great colleagues from the city, Darcel Clark, Eric Gonzalez, Melinda Katz, and Alvin Bragg. We learned. Some of us were introduced to the legislative process. Some of them were dealing with the legislative process for the first time. What an experience, right, team? We're glad to go back. By the way, we're glad to go back to the courtroom, Your Honor. But we learned how committed you are, what a great staff you have. You mentioned Brian and Karen Persicelli-Keogh and Jackie Bray. And I see Karen Scher, and I see Sabrina there, Breyer, who all work so hard on this day after day after day, and you have an incredible team, and I thank you for that. And Kathy Wild, you were part of that first discussion, and your efforts in the New York City partnership, and all the business leaders who are here, Ms. Konigsberg, the individual shop owner, but everybody who's here, from the Staten Island bids to the Albany bids to the Buffalo bids, who all came together. Thank you for doing that. Also, the members, you know, you also learn in this position what incredible people district attorneys are, because there's so many, obviously one in each county across the state, some big counties like Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan, some medium-sized like little old Staten Island, and then all the way from Hamilton County is Marcia King Perdue. By the way, Governor, she's still the only part-time DA in the state of New York, and we need to fix that. But also Susan Kachesi, who's here from Westchester, and the president-elect of DASNY, my dear friend Mary Pat Donnelly. And then others as well who came, the great Bill Fitzpatrick from Syracuse, Lee Kinlan, who's a former defense attorney, was never a prosecutor, but as soon as he came into the office, he realized that, hey, criminal justice system needs some tweaks, and we need a leader who's going to do that, and it wasn't easy, but you did it. And even our friends on the other side of the bar, our friends at the bar, the defense attorneys as well, who had a thoughtful and meaningful conversation, we thank them. And you said the legislature. It is true, we spent a lot of time with Speaker Carl Hastie, more than we thought we ever would, on Zoom meetings. We were with him at his dentist. We were at him at his school meetings. We saw, right, sorry, okay. Melinda, who's an experienced politician, saying, stop, Mike. But this is a great moment and one that we should relish. And so on behalf of the DAs, Morgan Baton, the executive director, we say thank you. On behalf of the people of Staten Island, who I represent, each one of us represent those of our county, we say thank you. To the people of the great state of New York, thank you for your trust in us. Thank you for your trust in this great governor. And let's go on and make sure that we now implement these laws and continue to be mindful of the words that are emblazoned on the portico outside this courthouse, which I first saw 40 years ago as a young lawyer carrying another lawyer's litigation bag. We used to have litigation bags back in the day for you young lawyers. And there are the words of George Washington, where it so proudly and so greatly says that the true administration of justice is the firmest pillar of good government. You restored that pillar for us all, Governor. We thank you for that. I'm so happy to be here. And now it's my equal privilege to introduce to you the great district attorney from the incredible county of the Bronx, the incredible Darcel Clark.
Yes, that was quite a challenge for us to do this. We were seeing each other every day. So I've seen the five of us together now finally again. We were seeing each other every day, 2 and 3 times a day. So I thought we would have separation anxiety. But in every county, we still had a lot more work to do. So it was easy to readjust again. But thank you. And Mike, you talked about being DAs and how important it is and being immersed in the legislative process. After going through this, I know why I did not run for the legislature. Okay, I know that. I commend them for that's just not for me. But anyway, first of all, Governor Hochul, I have to thank you and your entire legal team for taking the charge to make sure that discovery was included in this budget and during this legislative session. We needed these changes, and your steadfastness and making sure that nothing else was going to happen until discovery happened, we were 100% behind that because we really need that. And I'm so grateful that you allowed us to have our shared experience with you to make sure that we came out with some type of impactful legislation. So thank you for that. I also want to thank Majority Leader Stewart Cousins for her openness to make changes, right? Because this was important to the legislature in 2019 when they made these changes. And I stood behind them for it. It was transformative, and we needed it. So I want to thank her for keeping an open mind, in spite of the fact that they owned this, that they did this in 2019, to have the open mind to say, let's see if there needs to be changes. And of course, Kathy Hochul and you, the whole business, the partnership, and all the business leaders, and all the advocates that came out to raise your voices when we needed people to hear you most, you were there to deliver. So thank you for your tireless efforts to make sure that we got the changes that we need to help victims of crime. Now, Mike McMahon, the DA from Richmond and our DASNY president, said he spent more time with Speaker Carl Hastie than he ever thought. Well, that's different for me, because not only is he our speaker, but he's my assemblyman, okay? So I speak to him all the time. And let me tell you, long before we were trying to have these changes on discovery and everything else, Carl and I go back and forth on criminal justice all the time. But he's somebody that I know is a good man that believed in this. And I want to thank him and his entire team for their collaboration. He remained steadfast in the legislative process and took great strides to make sure that every perspective was included. He personally immersed himself in this process. I have never seen anything like this. He stood there with us line by line, word by word, as we worked this out. And you know what? This discovery is part of his legacy, and I know that because I've known him for a long time, and I've known what he's done. That change in 2019 was part of his legacy. Well, what also is part of his legacy now and this legislature is that they had the sense enough to know that changes needed to be made, and instead of digging themselves in, standing their ground and saying, we're not changing it, we think it's purpose, they made sure that the changes got done. So I want to thank Speaker Hastie and his team, as well as the rest of the legislature, because if it wasn't for them, these negotiations were crucial, but they generated monumental compromise that really came for us to finally have the discovery laws that we need now and the changes. So when the laws were changed in 2019, it was a major step forward, transformative. And we as DAs were supportive of the necessary reforms. And we want to continue the transparency that is important in discovery because it upholds procedural justice. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that the DA is in the business about procedural justice. And today we are happy to announce that through our collaborative efforts, we have now addressed the unintended consequences that came along with the initial discovery changes. And now we don't have those dismissals for, unreasonable reasons happening now. Now we were able to change those things so that now these simple amendments, victims now will receive justice. Defendants will continue to have the necessary information that they have. And you know what? Even with these changes, New York will still have discovery laws that are the most progressive in the nation. And this is something that we as New Yorkers should be proud of. All stakeholders took great care to consider the data that was showing that case dismissals were happening and that defendants were spending more time in custody. But ultimately, we did strike the right balance by creating common sense changes to ensure that justice is served, but most importantly, that public safety remains a top priority. And I stand here proudly on behalf of the people of the Bronx, inspired by my dedicated staff who do this work each and every day. And it's hard, but they do it every day because they believe in the work that we have to do on behalf of all the people of Bronx County. But I want to specifically call out some members of my staff, and that's Julian O'Connor, my general counsel, Gina Mignona, deputy general counsel, David Cohn, who is our senior appeals counsel, and Kate Theobald, who is my legislative director. They spent countless hours reading word for word, line by line of these bills, and were just so helpful in helping me to understand what changes we needed to go about. So I want to personally thank them in front of all of you because of what they do. So outside my lived experience as an assistant DA, a judge for 16 years, 9 years as a DA, one thing that I know for sure, you got to have smart, bright people walking with you and working with you to make sure that you get this impactful work done. And that's what I have in those staff members and all the members of my staff. So again, thank you so much for that. And I'm just hopeful that the changes to the discovery law will provide, and no, I know it will, it's going to provide fair justice to everyone involved in the criminal justice system. And this accomplishment marks another significant step toward this momentous day for the people of the Bronx, on my behalf, and for all New Yorkers. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague from the County of Kings, Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Governor Hochul, for your leadership, for your resolve, to your staff, for all their hard work throughout this process. I'm Eric Gonzalez. I'm the elected district attorney of Brooklyn, New York. That's Kings County. And on behalf of the 2.7 million people who call Brooklyn their home, we are grateful for the changes that are happening in our criminal justice system. Last year, Governor, I had the privilege of announcing that it was the safest year in Brooklyn's history in terms of gun violence. Gun violence had gone down a lot. Since record keeping had been established, this was the safest year in terms of the victimization of gun violence. But when we talked about public sentiment about overall safety, there was still a lot of challenges. People still felt that there were too many public safety challenges. And I think that discovery was part of that the perception was that people were not being held accountable, that our survivors and victims of crime were not getting due process in the justice system because cases were getting dismissed needlessly for things that were not relevant. and your commitment to stop a $250 million budget to make sure that this got resolved is so important. And I am thankful to you, and I am thankful for your team, thankful for the legislature, for my colleague DAs across the city and the state who have thousands of prosecutors who work tirelessly every day to support victims and survivors and to increase the public sentiment of safety. New York City and New York State are the safest places in the country, and we have to make sure people understand that. And by resolving this issue of discovery, I think it's going to lead to more people having confidence in the work that our offices do. It's going to help the morale of the police department, understanding when they make arrests that these cases will not be dismissed unless it's in the interest of justice or there's some evidentiary issues, but not on technicalities. And so on behalf of all of the survivors who came to our offices, who spoke out, who mobilized and allowed the legislature to understand it wasn't just prosecutors wanting to send people to prison, but that the system needed help, the system needed to be reformed, and that there's no shame to go back 5 years later and look at the data and say, was it working the way we anticipated, or do we need to make changes? And so I am grateful to the legislature for listening to your voices, but this could not have happened without all of you speaking out. So thank you to the partnership and all of the people who put a lot of time and energy. I'm grateful. Many of you know my own personal history around violence. My brother lost his life to gun violence. And so this is not just simply an issue as DA, but I understand what it means to go to the court and expect to receive justice. For this work that you've helped us get done, Governor, and I thank you for your confidence in the city DAs to talk about the policy and not the politics of this work, but how to get this work done. I am grateful as a crime victim survivor myself, but also on behalf of all the people that I serve every day. Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues. And as DA Clark rightfully said, thank you to our staff members across this state who work each and every day to protect victims, to improve public safety, and also to make sure that we have the most fair justice system in this country. And last words, DA Clark made this, but I'll say it again. It's a victory for the people of the state of New York. We maintain the things about discovery that were important, the early exchange of information, a really broad amount of information, probably more information than any defender actually needs to represent their clients, but things that were important to the legislature, we continue to make sure that all of that happened. We did not roll this back, we fixed it. Thank you, Governor.
Please welcome Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz.
The great District Attorney, Melinda Katz.
Thank you very much. So, DA McMahon, I wasn't telling you to stop. I was trying to point out with my hands, which I guess I didn't do, that Carl, was with us so many hours of the day through all the holidays, Easter, Passover. I probably shouldn't talk about that. But that, we also went to doctor's appointments with him. We were there with his dog. So it really was a joint effort. I want to thank the speaker. I also want to thank this governor. I have to tell you, she is one tough governor. I have to tell you, we didn't think this was going to happen. Right? And we were all talking and saying, well, last year, April, we fought about it, we talked about it, we tried getting it done. And it was a very difficult thing at the end of the session last year when it didn't happen. And so I want to thank the governor for standing steadfast. I want to thank the speaker for being with us in every aspect of his life during those days. I want to thank the Andrew Stewart Cousins, everyone that was involved, and the legislators who understood that this needed to be changed. Now, I bring with me a little bit of a different perspective than the other DAs. I was a legislator for several years, and I'm now prosecuting, 31 years later, under laws that I co-sponsored and passed in the legislature. So I bring with me a little bit of a different perspective, and I have to tell you this idea that we're going back, it is just not true. In last year alone, over 1,400 laws were signed into law last year alone. That means the laws that existed before were then changed. It happens every single day. It takes effective leaders to understand that laws need to change with the society in which we are living. You cannot have an active and an effective government without having those changes. So I want to thank everyone that is involved. In 2020, it was the right thing to do. We needed to turn over evidence to defendants so that they could prepare for their defense, so that they can have working knowledge of the evidence against them, so that the prosecution was fair and equitable, as my colleagues talked about, throughout the state of New York. But you know what's also effective leadership? It's also looking at data that happens after several years on the issues that you're talking about. So now we have 5 years of data. Now we have a governing body that looked at the data and said something is wrong when thousands of cases are getting dismissed, not for the substance of the case, but for technical details, for that 20th memo book that wasn't given over, for that transfer slip of a prison inmate that happened. Cases are getting dismissed, and then we 5 and we 62 in the state of New York have to call the victims and say, I hate to tell you, not only is your case dismissed, you're not going to get accountability for that crime, but your order of protection that was with your case. By the way, that's gone too. And that's a really difficult call to make. And think about what 2019 was when this law originally was passed and needed. Think about where we were. Body cams had just come online for the New York City Police Department just in 2019. No one could have imagined the amount of materials that were going to have to be turned over pursuant to this new law. My office alone reviewed 1.7 million discovery files and over 150,000 hours of body cams. You couldn't have figured that out in 2019. So you look at where you are in life, and you look at where society is, and you look at the challenges that each law has every single legislative session. And you work it, and you make sure that New Yorkers really have a voice, and make sure that they know that the government's behind them when they are hurt, and the government is also looking for equality in the justice system. And so I really thank everyone for this work that needs to evolve every day. It's so important, and it is, make no mistake about it, it is the sign of effective leadership when our leaders change and be flexible on the laws of the state. So I thank our leaders. I thank the governor, the speaker, the Senate. I also thank my colleagues, by the way. It really was an amazing thing, sitting on Zooms for hours at a time and making sure this law, because it was so important. And yes, we did have anxiety when we had to separate ourselves. There's no doubt. I felt like calling you the next morning and saying, how are you doing? You know, like, because we were together for so long and so often. So thank you for responding to the needs of all New Yorkers. And now it is my pleasure to welcome the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. For your steadfastness, your strong leadership, leaning in, convening all of us. We thank everyone in the room. You convened us. So thank you for helping us get this done. And it's been quite a collaborative effort. I don't want to retread what all of my colleagues have said, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank the small business owners, including the one in Manhattan, the many in Manhattan, I should say, and so many advocates who joined. And I know over the years, we've all given examples of cases that have been dismissed, and dismissed for no good reason. And I guess we can stop now because it's been changed, but I want to just bring us back to that. I was sitting here thinking, I have the honor of introducing next an advocate and a survivor, but I think what drove so many of us, whether it was the partnership, whether it was other advocates, whether it was the other electeds, so many who were part of this effort, I just cannot imagine. My staff does it, I've done it, but being a survivor, sitting in a district attorney's office and being told your case is getting dismissed. Not because the prosecutor didn't believe you, not because there wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but, for example, in one of my cases, because we found an additional photo of your injuries, more proof of the crime. Your case is dismissed. That wouldn't be true in any other state in this country, and now it's not true in New York. So I'm grateful to all of you. I think other DAs have said it. We now have the implementation part, and we will lean in, and we'll also do that together. But really, to bring us back to why we're here, it is my distinct honor to introduce a non-elected, an advocate, the kind that when we talk about is right on the ground, working side by side with people affected by these laws. So thank you for all you do, Angelina Rosado.
Oh, child. Hi, y'all. I'm not nervous or nothing. Oh, Lord. I guess I could say, Mama, we made it. My name is Angelina Rosado. I come before you as a survivor of both domestic and sexual violence that turned my pain into my purpose. I am now the co-founder and executive director of Sisters in Purple. We're a trauma-informed, survivor-led organization. Today is more than just a press conference for us. It is a celebration of courage, collaboration, and long overdue change. I stand here filled of hope. I literally named my daughter Hope because that's just what I'm gonna have to embody for the rest of my life. And pride, because we got it done. Survivors, advocates, lawmakers, Governor Hochul, we all came together to ensure that New York's discovery law finally carries the right language and the right protection for all that are affected. This isn't just a policy fix or minor tweaks. For us, this is a lifeline. Before these changes, dangerous gaps in this law left many survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault vulnerable, forced to relive trauma in a system that promised justice, but far too often only delivered pain. In New York, over 42% of women have experienced intimate partner violence. That is not just a statistic, that is me. That is all my sisters in purple and every single victim of domestic violence. These are women that you work with, women that you love. And for so often, we were told that our voices didn't matter. But today, we changed that. On April 10th, Governor Hochul invited a group of survivors to Albany, literally like 2 days before. Literally. She did that, and she allowed us to use our voices. We shared our stories and our advocacy for change of this law. She didn't just make space, She created this space. She didn't just listen to us. She gave us a platform, literally. She opened doors that had been shut for so long. And I thank you, Governor, because before that, survivors may have been asked to be in the room, but we weren't asked to speak in the room. With the changes that Governor Hochul championed, the law now better protects victims from being re-victimized by a system that is supposed to protect them. I want to finish off with this quote, and I love a good quote, and it is of my own. But I want you guys to understand, survivors are not voiceless. Everyone else just wants us on mute. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here today.
All right, we're going to have time for just a couple questions. Not because we don't like you, but because you heard the other pretty horse, so we're going to have to keep it quick. On topic, Alan?
Good afternoon, Governor. Can you just walk us through some of the concrete details that you come to an agreement with lawmakers on alternative discovery form? Is the ink dry, or are you confident on that?
The ink is dry. It's been dry for a few weeks now. But as you know, this is one of my top priorities, to make sure that we can eliminate the ability for cases to be dismissed based on minor technicalities, and also the timing with respect to turning over evidence. But I will defer to a district attorney who helped. It is not going to change at this point, is my message. It's going to be voted on. It will not change from what it is right now, but you guys want to describe it? Okay, Mike. Okay.
Yep. Thank you so much. So as to the specifics of the bill, in broad strokes, what the bill does is still requires us to turn over materials as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But when the defense makes a motion or challenges that we've done that, whether or not we've done that, the court is directed to look at whether or not we acted in good faith and in due diligence, and if we did, also to look at what type of harm has been suffered by the defense, if any, and to fashion a remedy that is proportionate to that harm. And also to look at the totality of the circumstances of what we've provided, not sort of go through a line by line and look at little things that have been missed if everything has been provided. It'll also, we have to file what's called a certificate of compliance when we are done, and we are ready, or we think we've provided everything that we have and that we can have. And then if the defense has objections, they have to make those objections within 35 days, raise it to the court and say, hey, I'm missing something, and to confer with us. There's a duty to confer, so that we can make sure that the defense has everything that they need and that the case can proceed to a just outcome based on what the law and facts require, not some sort of gotcha element that's built into the law. So that's what the law basically provides. It also limits to some extent, to a small degree, what we have to gather and provide. The current language says most items that are relevant to the case. The language will now say relevant to the charges of the case. So just to narrow it a little bit, but certainly if a defendant ever feels, or their lawyer ever feels that something is outstanding, they can certainly ask the prosecution, they can ask the court to provide it without the case being dismissed and a victim being left out in the cold of the justice system.
So you feel this is addressing the issue of cases being dismissed and those numbers continue to rise?
We certainly do. We think that this will address that directly head-on and have a big impact, and we also think that it will affect indirectly the amount of material up front, so that the prosecutors can continue to do what the job is to gather the evidence and proceed based on the facts and the law of a case. Yep, sure thing.
I also think part of the reforms to this legislation it should probably help increase dispositions, move things more quickly through the system. What we had seen during the discovery process, things had slowed down. More people have been held in custody for longer, waiting for their days in trial because there was so much litigation around discovery. This streamlines that, and I think this will be a really substantive part of due process, moving our cases more quickly through the justice system, getting people out of jail, including Rikers Island, and encouraging the parties, because part of the process envisions prosecutors and defenders and the court coming together. Judge Zayas was here earlier, trying to streamline things so that there's quicker access to our court system. So I think that's going to be a tremendous outcome as well.
Anything else on that topic, Henry?
My Governor, I emphasize the search technical phone is big time for me right now. This has become a theme of budgets recently. You holding it up, looking for criminal justice tweaks 1 year, bail reform this year. It's this and involuntary committals. Can you assure New Yorkers to any extent that you think you finally kind of have the balance of criminal justice in the state right? Should we be looking for more tweaks next year? How will we know when we're done?
My decisions are data-driven. It came to light that there had been a dramatic increase in the number of dismissals. Again, unintended consequences, perhaps, that we look at from 2019 to 2024. I will always be looking to see whether there's areas where we're failing the public in keeping them safe. I don't have an agenda item right now that I'm going to use for next year's budget, but the district attorneys and other people who are part of the criminal justice system, their voices are important to me. That's where I find out, is there anything else I can do as the governor of the state of New York to keep people safer? So not closing the door, but we'll be focusing on it over the next year as we develop our policies next summer and fall.
All right, I want to thank our DAs for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Speak to you. Go ahead.
I can't hear it. I can't hear it. I'm having a little trouble hearing the question.
The question was, LG bill as changes to campaign finance, and I'm quoting, do you think it's appropriate to negotiate changes to the democratic process behind closed doors?
We worked very hard to make sure we could make adjustments where there are failures. One of them certainly was our discovery process. Another area I looked at closely was what is happening with our campaign finance bill. This was something that was important to the leaders of the legislature, and all it does is it mirrors the New York City public financing system, which is very successful. So we're just matching up with what they do in New York City. Why don't I what? Well, this is an opportunity I have, is to be able to focus on priorities that I have, that I've talked about, that these have been raised before by legislators, by the leadership, and people are raising concerns, and it's my responsibility to be responsive. Lieutenant Governor bill is simply something that makes sense. We've talked about it for a number of years, and setting up a system that is more analogous to what you have for the president and the vice president, or how lieutenant governors run on the same ticket in the primary and the general with the governor, and they select their own in many, many other states. So this is also a chance to do cleanup and kind of look at where we are out of sync with what other states do and make sure that we mirror that.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Last one. Where did the question come from? Anisi, all right. We saw earlier today a massive disruption on the Long Island Railroad because of a failure of the Amtrak electrical system. In my judgment, this is a forewarning of what people are going to be heading into as this work begins on the East River Tunnel. I wrote a letter saying we have other ideas. I personally think the work should be done evenings and weekends so it's least disruptive to our riders. I also suggested that the trains can come into Grand Central Station. We can take some pressure off. I also suggested that we can add more cars to the trains, add capacity. So all of these, in my mind, are on the table. We did receive a letter today acknowledging our ideas. They're willing to have a conversation with us. So hopefully this will lead to a productive resolution so we don't leave our commuters in the situation they were on the Long Island Railroad this morning. That is not acceptable to me. Amtrak knows they can do better, and I'm going to help them get there. Thank you.